They laughed at your vision. You remember it clearly, don't you? That moment you dared to share your dream raw, real, brimming with fire, and the room shifted. Some smirked, some stared blankly, others outright dismissed you. They labeled it a fantasy, a phase, even a delusion. But you knew. You just knew. Something deeper than logic stirred in your bones. It wasn't a thought. It was a knowing. You spoke not from ego, but from essence. And yet, they couldn't receive it. Because when a chosen one opens their mouth, they speak from places most people have never visited. And that's the danger of being ahead of your time. You sound insane to those who are imprisoned by the present. They didn't see what you saw. They didn't hear what you heard. They didn't feel what you were feeling. Because what you carried was not just a goal, it was a divine instruction, a seed from another dimension, a glimpse of a future only revealed to those bold enough to believe before it's visible. But they laughed. They called you unstable, overly ambitious, even arrogant. And let's be honest, some of that laughter hurt. Some of those rejections came from people you loved, people you trusted, people you thought would at least try to understand. Instead, they told you to be realistic, to tone it down, to get your head out of the clouds. But you couldn't, because you weren't in the clouds, you were in the spirit. And let me tell you something. Chosen one, that wasn't just imagination. That was revelation. You were being shown something, pulled toward something, and you had the courage to chase it even when the world rolled its eyes. You didn't just have a vision, you became the vision. You carried it in your energy. You breathed it in your words. You aligned with it in silence, when no one else could see what you were doing behind the scenes. And isn't it interesting how the same people who dismissed your dream as delusion are now quietly watching it unfold before their very eyes? They don't have much to say now, do they? Because something shifted. Something materialized. And what once lived in your spirit now stands in front of them as undeniable, unshakable, real. You know, this is a pattern that runs deep in the lives of the chosen. History is full of stories just like yours. Let's go way back to the story of Noah. God gave Noah a vision, an ark, a blueprint, a warning. And what did the people around him do? They mocked him. For decades, they called him mad. They scoffed at the idea of rain. They labeled his building project a foolish waste of time. But Noah kept building, quietly, consistently, faithfully. He wasn't driven by public opinion, he was led by divine obedience. And when the rain finally came, it silenced every critic. You see, the rain didn't just confirm the ark, it confirmed the builder. And now, chosen one, the same thing is happening in your life. The rain has come, and the fruit of your faith is beginning to manifest. What they called delusion was simply divine timing in disguise. What they laughed at now has them speechless. That's the power of spiritual vision. It doesn't need validation. It just needs obedience. You didn't need them to agree with you. You just needed to keep walking And yes, the path was lonely. Yes, the silence was heavy. Yes, the waiting tested every ounce of your patience. But you stayed the course. You honored what you saw. You trusted the invisible. And now, it's becoming undeniable. What's unfolding now is not just a success story. It's a spiritual vindication. You weren't delusional. You were devoted. You weren't crazy. You were called, and they see that now. They might never apologize. They might never admit they were wrong. But their silence says it all, because now they're watching the very thing they said would never happen. And deep down, they know. They know you didn't get here through luck. They know this wasn't coincidence. They feel it in their gut that what you carry is bigger than talent, louder than effort, and stronger than logic. You carry an anointing, a divine assignment. And now that it's breaking through into the natural world, people don't know what to do with you. Some are intrigued. Some are intimidated. Some are still in denial. But none of them can ignore you anymore, because your delusion has become reality. And that's the beauty of the chosen path. It may begin in isolation, but it always ends in elevation. The ones who laughed, they just didn't know what it looks like when heaven begins to write through a human soul. But you knew, and now they know too. You spoke from spirit. They heard nonsense. Let that sink in for a moment. Chosen one. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You weren't performing. You were simply expressing what was burning inside you, what the Spirit whispered in the quiet corners of your soul. But to them, it sounded like static, like gibberish, like noise without meaning. Because you weren't speaking their language. You were tuned to a higher frequency, one they couldn't detect, let alone understand. And that's what happens when you carry divine insight in a world obsessed with surface logic. You speak from the depths, and they respond from the shallows. You open your mouth with truth, and they react with confusion, not because you're wrong, but because you're not from the same place. You are speaking from the realm of spirit, where things don't have to be proven to be real. They're felt, known, trusted, but they were locked in the realm of sight, where if it can't be measured, it must not exist. And so, when you opened your mouth, they rolled their eyes, not because you lacked clarity, but because they lacked capacity. The world has always struggled to interpret what it doesn't understand. And when that misunderstanding meets spiritual power, it calls it madness. You think of someone like Joan of Arc, a young girl, untrained, unqualified by human standards. Yet she claimed to hear the voice of God. She claimed to be led by divine guidance. She claimed to know things no one had taught her. And what did the world do? They tried her, mocked her, burned her. But history remembers her not as delusional, but as divinely led. She wasn't crazy, she was chosen. And in the same way, you too have carried messages, insights, and warnings that didn't come from books or teachers, but from spirit, from the realm beyond sight. And when you tried to share them, you were met with resistance, shrugs, eye rolls, even fear, because your words activated something they weren't ready to confront. See, when you carry spiritual truth, it has a vibration to it, a weight, and that weight reveals what others are lacking. It exposes the emptiness of surface-level living. It pulls back the veil. And not everyone's ready for that level of exposure. So they labeled your insight nonsense because it didn't fit into their frame. It wasn't packaged the way they wanted it. It wasn't conventional. It wasn't predictable, but it was real. And now that same truth is unfolding exactly as you said it would. Now those weird things you spoke about are happening right in front of them. Now the very wisdom they once laughed at is starting to echo through their own lives. And they can't explain it. Some of them are pretending they never doubted you. Some are trying to rewrite the past, as if they always believed in you. Others are staying quiet because they still don't understand. But they know better than to mock it now, because your words, those crazy words, carried confirmation, not man's confirmation, God's. And when God confirms a word, He does it in such a way that even the proudest skeptic is left speechless. So let me tell you this. Chosen one, never regret speaking what the Spirit placed in your heart. Never water down your truth to make it digestible for those with no appetite for the divine. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You are not here to be palatable. You are here to proclaim what Spirit reveals, no matter how strange it sounds in the moment. Because truth is rarely comfortable at first, but over time, it proves itself. And right now, your truth is doing just that. The nonsense is becoming sense. The madness is becoming method. The delusion is unfolding as destiny. And you, yes, you are walking proof that Spirit doesn't lie. Now they're starting to see that the words you carried weren't born in ego or fantasy, but in alignment, in obedience, in revelation. And even if they never say it out loud, they feel it. They know it. There's something different about you, something not taught, not rehearsed, not imitated, something divine. And here's the powerful truth. God gave you the message because you had the courage to speak it, because you had the strength to endure being misunderstood, because you had the faith to sound crazy if it meant being obedient. And now the ones who called you delusional are watching their own logic unravel, because logic can't compete with divine timing. And your words, those same words they dismissed, are now bearing fruit. Visible fruit. Unexplainable fruit. And that's why they're quiet, not because they don't remember what you said, but because they do. Because what you said is starting to happen. And there's no defense for that. There's no comeback for truth. So let them stay silent. Let them watch. Your truth doesn't need applause. It's already been confirmed by heaven. And that's more than enough. God gave you the blueprint in dreams. Let's talk about those moments you kept to yourself. The ones that came late at night, when the world was asleep and the veil was thin. Dreams so vivid, so alive. They felt more real than waking life. Visions that didn't just flash across your mind, they stayed with you, haunted you in a sacred way, pulled at your spirit like a magnet, drawing you towards something holy. Those dreams weren't random. They weren't just imagination running wild. They were divine downloads, blueprints from the mind of God, delivered straight into your subconscious like sacred scrolls tucked into the chambers of your soul. But when you tried to explain them, when you dared to give voice to the images, the instructions, the symbols, you were met with blank stares, or worse, ridicule. People told you to stop dreaming. They told you to focus on real life. They said, "That's not how the world works." But you already knew you weren't building in the world. You were building beyond it. You weren't following their map. You were holding onto God's blueprint, and that blueprint was unlike anything they'd ever seen. It wasn't always clear. It didn't come with step-by-step instructions. Sometimes it showed up as a feeling, a phrase, a recurring image that echoed over and over until you couldn't ignore it anymore. You'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, not out of fear, but because something sacred had just touched your awareness. And even when you didn't fully understand it, you knew it meant something. You weren't just dreaming, you were remembering. Remembering the purpose buried beneath this lifetime. Remembering the mission that predates your birth. Remembering who you really are when the noise of the world falls away. But the world doesn't honor dreams like that, because people are afraid of what they don't understand. They mock what they can't control. And if you're not careful, their doubt becomes your own. But you, chosen one, you held on. Even when no one else believed in what you saw, you believed. Even when no one else understood what you were building, you kept building. Like Nehemiah, up on that wall, brick by brick, while voices below tried to distract and tear him down. You remember they mocked him too. They said he was wasting time, building something that would never last. But he kept working. Why? Because he wasn't answering to them. He was following a divine blueprint, one that didn't make sense to the people around him, but made perfect sense to the one who gave it. And the same is true for you. The dreams you've carried, the ones that refused to let go of you, they were planted there by heaven. Not for everyone to see. Not for everyone to cheer for. But for you to walk out, step by step, in obedience. And here's the miraculous part. What started as invisible fragments in your sleep has begun to form into reality. The sketches you saw in your spirit are becoming structure. The whispers you heard in prayer are turning into strategy. You were never delusional. You were receiving sacred architecture. And yes, it confused people. Yes, it seemed strange. Because while others were scrolling for inspiration, you were dreaming in revelation. That's the difference between the called and the curious. You weren't browsing ideas, you were being birthed into purpose. And now the blueprint is becoming visible. Now the pieces are aligning. Now what once felt chaotic and jumbled is starting to look like design. You're seeing it come together. And so are they. And suddenly, those who once laughed at your crazy ideas are silent. Not because they finally believe in you, but because they don't know how to explain what's happening. It doesn't fit their narrative. You didn't follow their steps. You didn't check the boxes. You didn't get approval from the crowd. And yet, you're manifesting something real. That's what happens when you trust the divine blueprint over public opinion. That's what happens when you let your dreams guide you instead of letting fear define you. And now, chosen one, you're stepping into what was always meant to be yours. Not because you forced it, but because you followed what others ignored. So the next time someone tries to label you as delusional for dreaming big, let them misunderstand. Let them question, because you already know you're not dreaming just for dreaming's sake. You're following instructions from the Most High, and every time you honor that blueprint, even when it's blurry, even when it's lonely, you unlock another layer of your destiny. So keep dreaming, keep building, keep trusting what was given to you, even when no one else sees it yet. Because one day, they'll walk through the house you built with nothing but faith and a dream. And they'll have no choice but to admit, it was never a delusion. It was a divine design all along. You saw it before it existed. Chosen one. This is where it all starts to click into place. The moment you realize that what they called delusion was actually divine foresight. That what they called fantasy was faith moving before the facts caught up. You didn't wait for proof. You didn't ask for permission. You moved because something inside you knew. You saw it before it existed, and that sight, that inner vision, terrified the people around you. Because when you see the future while everyone else is still bound to the present, they'll either follow you or fear you. Let's be clear, what you saw wasn't just wishful thinking. It wasn't just a dream. It was a flash from the Spirit, a glimpse through time, showing you what will be long before it ever arrived in the natural. And it lit something in you, a fire, a conviction, a drive that made no sense to others because they were still waiting for the world to change. While you were already walking in the change you saw coming, you spoke about things before they had form. You acted like the thing already existed. You walked like it was real because to you it was, and now it's starting to take shape. The puzzle pieces that felt disconnected for so long are falling into place. The people who doubted you are watching in quiet disbelief. They're seeing the thing you talked about actually come alive, and it's unsettling to them because it forces a question, how did you know? And the answer is simple. You didn't know with your mind. You saw with your spirit. Remember Abraham, God told him to leave everything he knew. No map, no GPS, no step-by-step plan. Just a promise. Just a vision of a future that made no earthly sense. He walked anyway. And that's exactly what you did. You walked when there was no path. You spoke when there was no echo. You built when there was no blueprint, just the one etched into your soul. And they didn't get it. How could they? You were seeing with eyes they didn't have. You were hearing with ears that had been tuned by the Spirit. And here's what most people don't understand. Faith feels like delusion when it's fully activated, because it dares to move without evidence, because it stands when everyone else waits, because it chooses trust over logic. But for you, it was never about being logical. It was about being loyal to the vision you saw, to the voice you heard, to the purpose you felt pulling you forward like gravity. You weren't chasing a dream. You were answering a call, and while they stood still, analyzing, calculating, doubting, you kept moving. Even when it was lonely, Even when your steps felt uncertain, even when you questioned yourself, you didn't quit because the vision was stronger than the fear. And now your steps are lining up with your sight. What was once invisible is now visible. What was once abstract is now tangible. What was once mocked as delusion is now impossible to deny. You didn't get lucky. You got aligned. You didn't fake it until you made it. You faithed it until it manifested. And the people who once rolled their eyes when you spoke are starting to ask questions. They're looking at the results, and they're stunned. They have no framework for this, no formula, because they watched you walk through the storm, and they can't understand how you're still standing, let alone thriving. And yet, here you are. You saw it before it existed. You believed it before it became, and now you're living it while they're still trying to make sense of it. This is the part they never talk about: the cost of vision, the burden of seeing too early, the pain of knowing what's coming but having no one believe you. It's not just lonely, it's heavy. But you carried it anyway. And because you did, you're standing on sacred ground. So let them look confused. Let them replay your old words in their minds. Let them sit in their silence while your reality screams the truth louder than words ever could. You are proof that what's seen in the spirit will eventually show up in the natural. You are the fulfillment of promises made in secret places. You are what happens when someone refuses to wait for evidence to trust what God showed them in the dark. And if you're wondering why the room is quiet now, it's because they see it. They see the thing you saw. They see the life you built with vision and faith. They see the purpose that once sounded too big now, standing in front of them like a mountain they can't ignore. And deep down, they know the vision was never the problem. Their lack of sight was, but not you. You saw it. You followed it. You became it. And that chosen one is what makes you unstoppable. You were marked as too intense. That's the label they gave you when they couldn't understand your energy. Too much. Too deep. Too serious. As if intensity were a flaw. As if caring deeply, seeing clearly, and feeling profoundly was something to apologize for. But let's get one thing straight. Your intensity wasn't a personality quirk. It was spiritual authority. You weren't loud because you needed attention. You weren't passionate because you wanted control. You carried weight, divine weight. And that weight made people uncomfortable. Not because you were doing anything wrong, but because they were living too light. Your presence has always shifted the room. You know this. The moment you enter, the air changes. The energy changes. And not because you're trying to dominate, but because the spirit in you refuses to shrink. You walk in truth, and truth doesn't whisper. It doesn't water itself down to avoid offending people still committed to illusions. And so, when you spoke, it pierced. When you moved, it disrupted. When you shared your convictions, people recoiled not because they didn't hear you, but because your clarity revealed their confusion. You became the mirror they didn't ask for, the light they couldn't dim. And instead of facing what your presence activated, they labeled you. They called you intense, as if that was something bad. But chosen one, Let me tell you this. Your intensity is your anointing showing, your ability to feel deeply, to speak boldly, to move decisively. That's not a flaw. That's what happens when someone lives in alignment with their spirit. You weren't built to be neutral. You weren't designed to be lukewarm. You were made to burn with purpose. And here's what's wild, and the same intensity they mocked is now producing results they can't deny. Your passion is bearing fruit. Your commitment is opening doors. Your too much is now becoming the only thing that's making sense to them. Because here's the truth, they were never rejecting you. They were rejecting the part of themselves that knew they were playing it small. Your fire threatened their comfort. Your clarity exposed their fog. Your courage revealed their fear. It was never about you being too intense. It was about them being too scared. And now, as your fruit begins to ripen, your work thriving, your vision unfolding, your energy undeniable, they're watching from the sidelines, stunned, speechless. Because what they called obsessive is turning out to be effective. What they dismissed as too much was exactly what it took. You didn't just survive the judgment. You thrived through it. You kept showing up. You kept praying. Even when your tears drowned your words. You kept building. Even when no one clapped. You kept walking. Even when the whispers behind your back got louder. You didn't tone yourself down, you tuned yourself up. And now your light is too bright to ignore. Remember the story of Elijah, the prophet who called down fire from heaven. The one who stood alone on Mount Carmel, facing hundreds of false prophets. He didn't hold back. He didn't play small. He was intense, fierce, bold. And guess what? God met him in the fire. Because when you carry that kind of spiritual energy, heaven responds. That's you. You've carried fire. You've endured isolation. You've been misunderstood. Not because you were wrong, but because you were real in a world addicted to pretense. And now, that fire in you, it's not burning you out. It's lighting the way. People are watching your journey. And even if they don't say it, they feel it. There's something different about them. That difference is divine intensity, not chaos, not drama, but focus, conviction, power. And now, the room that once rolled its eyes at your passion, it's falling silent. Because the results are speaking louder than the critics ever did. You didn't need validation. You just needed time. Time for your gifts to mature. Time for the seeds to grow. Time for the fruit to ripen. And now that it has no one's calling you too intense anymore, they're just quiet. They're watching. They're wondering how you kept going when most people would have folded. And here's the answer. You're not running on ego. You're running on assignment. Your intensity wasn't to impress, it was to build, to birth, to break chains and shift atmospheres. So don't ever let anyone shame you for the fire you carry. Because that fire, it's sacred, it's holy, it's divine. And now, they're seeing what happens when someone refuses to dim their light just to fit into rooms that were never built to hold their brilliance. You, chosen one, are not too much. You are exactly enough for the mission God placed in your spirit. Let them stay silent. Let them stay stunned. Because the same intensity they feared is the very fire that's changing everything. The tables turned without warning. One moment. You are the one they whispered about. The dreamer, the weirdo, the one who changed. You remember those looks they gave you, half confusion, half condescension. You remember the way conversations quieted when you entered the room. How invitations stopped coming. How even your silence made them uncomfortable. But now something has shifted. You didn't announce it. You didn't force it. You didn't even try to prove anything. But the energy around you began to change, and with it, so did the responses. The ones who once mocked your walk are now watching it. The ones who once rolled their eyes are now silent in your presence. And not because you changed to please them, but because your elevation revealed their limitations. It's unsettling, isn't it? To see the same people who once dismissed you suddenly grow quiet when your name comes up. They didn't expect this. They didn't want this. They were comfortable when you were doubting yourself, second-guessing your path, unsure if you heard from God at all. But when the fruit began to bloom, when your crazy ideas began to work, when the life you described in whispers started to take shape in the open, they had no response. Because here's the thing about a chosen one. Your rise is never loud. It's never boastful. It doesn't need a spotlight. It just happens, like Joseph, thrown into a pit by his own brothers, sold, forgotten, left behind, all because he had a dream. And not just any dream, but one that placed him in a position they couldn't imagine for him. He didn't chase revenge. He didn't shout for validation. He simply kept walking with God. And then, without warning, Pharaoh called his name. In one day, he went from prisoner to ruler, from the bottom to the top, from mocked to magnetic. And that's what you're living through now, chosen one. The tables have turned. The same energy they used to disregard you is now stunned by you. Because you didn't need to convince them. You let God handle the revealing. You kept your head down while the Spirit raised you up. You stayed faithful while the world looked the other way. And now the shift is undeniable. What once was seen as delusion is now drawing respect, even if it's silent. What once was ridiculed is now causing people to study your every move. And make no mistake, they are watching. They're watching how you carry yourself. They're watching what you do next. They're watching how you respond to success. But what they don't understand is that success wasn't your goal. Obedience was. You didn't follow this path for applause. You followed it because the voice of God echoed louder in your soul than the voices around you. And now the evidence is too clear to ignore. Your alignment is visible. Your growth is measurable. Your glow is undeniable. They don't have the language for it, but they feel it. That something in you has settled, strengthened, transformed. And that transformation is making noise in the spirit. That's why people are circling back. That's why some are acting like they never doubted you. That's why others are avoiding you altogether. Because to face you now would mean facing the part of themselves they tried to silence. But you don't need their recognition. You've already been recognized by heaven, and heaven's validation turns tables in ways human effort never could. So let the silence speak. Let the awe remain unspoken. Let them process in private what they mocked in public. Because the truth is, they never expected you to survive, let alone thrive. They expected you to fall apart under the weight of rejection. But instead, you rose, you grew, you healed, you expanded. Not because you had more resources, but because you had resilience. Because you understood something they didn't when you're chosen. The rejection is the refinement. The isolation is the preparation. And the silence is sacred. And now, the roles have reversed. You're not looking for a seat at their table. You've been building your own quietly, steadily, faithfully. And now that it's ready, they don't know how to sit with you, because the same table they once refused to make room for you at now feels too small for your presence. Chosen one, this is your confirmation you never needed to chase. You never needed to explain. You just needed to stay aligned. Because when the Spirit moves, it moves in silence first. And then suddenly, and this moment of awe, of reversal, of speechless realization, is the result of every step you took in faith. The tables have turned, and now all that's left is for you to keep walking, keep building, keep shining, because the story isn't over, it's only just begun. The delusion was the divine seed, chosen one. Hear this with every fiber of your being. What they called delusion was never dysfunction. It was a divine seed, buried deep, hidden in the soil of your soul. A seed that needed time, darkness, and pressure to break open. They couldn't see it, of course, they couldn't. Seeds don't shout their purpose from the ground. They develop in silence. And so did you, when you started to feel things others didn't. When you began to hear whispers in your spirit that no one else understood. When you were drawn to visions that felt too big for your environment. That wasn't confusion. That was your seed cracking open. God placed something eternal inside of you. A blueprint from another realm. A divine assignment dressed in mystery. But in the early stages, even you doubted it. Even you questioned. Why do I feel so out of place? Why am I so stirred by things no one else cares about? Why do I sense something's coming? But I don't know what. Because a seed doesn't look like what it's becoming. And when people looked at you, they couldn't recognize what was planted inside. They saw the shell, the struggle, the questions. But God saw the oak tree, the spiritual warrior, the messenger, the vessel, and because they couldn't define it, they dismissed it. They called it delusion, emotionalism, fantasy. Said you were doing too much. Said you needed to come back to reality, but you were already living in a higher reality. You were already being activated. And as that seed began to stir, you started breaking away from old circles. Old conversations felt empty. Old desires lost their grip. And instead of feeling full, you felt called. But being called is uncomfortable. It often begins with confusion. Because transformation is noisy at first. Especially when you're growing in silence. Surrounded by people who can't hear what you hear. That's why your presence became agitating. Why you felt misunderstood even by those closest to you. Because when your seed begins to grow, it disrupts the soil. It changes the shape of everything around it. And instead of watering you, they questioned you. Instead of celebrating your awakening, they tried to fix you. Because when someone doesn't understand your seed, they'll try to kill it, not out of malice, but out of fear. But here's what they didn't realize, that seed wasn't theirs to understand. It was God's to grow. And now, That growth is undeniable. What they once mocked now carries momentum. What they once whispered about behind your back is showing up as manifestation in front of their eyes. And they don't know how to process it. Because how do you explain someone who should have fallen apart but instead flourished? How do you explain someone who was labeled unstable now, walking in clarity? How do you explain a so-called delusion that is now producing undeniable results? You don't. You sit in awe of the harvest. And that's exactly what's happening right now. The seed has taken root. The roots have grown deep. And the fruit is beginning to show. And here's the beautiful, divine irony. The very thing they tried to talk you out of is now the very thing drawing people toward you. You were never meant to be understood in the early stages, because sacred things are always hidden at first. Jesus didn't arrive in a palace. Moses didn't lead from a throne. David was anointed in a field before anyone even thought to call his name. It's always the hidden ones, the misunderstood ones, the dismissed ones, because the seed always comes before the tree. And now, you're starting to see what was growing all along. Not a delusion, not dysfunction, destiny. So when you walk into rooms, now walk tall. Not in pride, but in knowing. Knowing that what you carry is real. Knowing that the process was not punishment, it was preparation. Knowing that your sensitivity was not weakness, it was spiritual awareness. You were never broken. You were becoming. You were never too much. You were just germinating in an environment that couldn't hold your roots. But now you've outgrown the small spaces. Now you've stretched beyond the pot they tried to plant you in. Now the branches of your destiny are reaching wide and bearing fruit. And the silence around you, that's not rejection anymore. That's reverence. Because they see it now. They feel it now. Even if they can't say it, that the one they called delusional was the one carrying divine seed all along. They can't explain it, but they can't deny it. That's where things have landed now. Chosen one, right here, in this strange, quiet space where your presence speaks louder than your words ever could, where the very people who once scoffed, dismissed, even whispered behind your back, are left standing in the echo of their own doubt, faced with a reality they never saw coming. They don't know how it happened. They don't understand why it happened. But one thing is clear, they can't deny that it did. And that's the beauty of walking in divine timing. When your life begins to align with a vision you've carried in secret, people start looking for reasons. They search for explanations that make sense in the natural. Maybe they got lucky. Maybe something changed in their environment. Maybe it's a coincidence, but deep down, they know. They know this kind of alignment doesn't happen by accident. They know your glow isn't cosmetic. They know your peace wasn't manufactured. They know the power you walk in now didn't come from a seminar, a mentor, or a motivational book. It came from God, from the crushing, from the wilderness, from the years of wrestling in the dark with nothing but faith in your hands. And that's what makes it unexplainable. Because you didn't rise by playing the game. You didn't climb the ladder they expected. You didn't use their rules, their strategies, their approval. You followed the Spirit. You obeyed when it didn't make sense. You sowed in silence. You stayed hidden. You endured the ridicule, the loneliness, the pain of being overlooked, and now they're witnessing the result of what obedience looks like when heaven decides it's time. They can't say it out loud, but it's written all over their energy. They used to speak about you, and now they're silent around you. Because the fruit has spoken, and fruit can't be debated. They might still try to keep their distance. They might still pretend they don't notice. But their eyes follow you. Their ears perk up when your name is mentioned. And their spirit feels the shift. Even if their mind can't admit it. Because what once sounded like delusion now feels like prophecy. And prophecy always unsettles those who are not in alignment with truth. You are the proof they didn't expect. And what makes it all the more potent is this: you never fought for this moment. You never begged for their recognition. You never tried to rub anything in their faces. You just kept walking. Quietly, faithfully, unapologetically. And now, your elevation speaks for itself. This is the part of your journey that's most powerful. Not because you have to say anything, but because you don't. Your life is saying everything. Your peace says, "I've been through the storm and didn't drown." Your clarity says, "I've walked through confusion and came out knowing who I am." Your joy says, "I've been emptied and now I'm overflowing." And your silence says, "What words never could God did this." So let them be speechless. Let them sit in the gap between their former judgment and your current glory. Let them wrestle with the tension between who they thought you were and who you've become. Because the truth is, chosen one, you didn't change. You simply grew into what was always inside you. You didn't become someone else. You became fully yourself. And now that you're walking in the fullness of that identity, nothing needs to be explained. The fruit is proof, and the silence. That's heaven's punctuation mark. So keep walking. Keep building. Keep shining. Not for them, but for the one who called you. Because this journey was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving God right. And now, with every step you take, you confirm that the vision was real, the dream was divine, and the path you followed in secret was never delusion. It was destiny, chosen one. Breathe. Let your spirit settle in this truth. You are exactly where you're meant to be. Every tear you cried, every night you doubted, every time you questioned whether it was all in your head, God saw it. And now, heaven is confirming what your soul already knew. It was never a fantasy. It was never too big. It was never a mistake. You were given sight others weren't ready for. You were given faith that couldn't be taught. And you were entrusted with a calling that could only be carried by someone willing to look crazy before they looked called. Now that the evidence is manifesting, take a moment to honor how far you've come, not just in what you've achieved, but in who you've become. Stronger, wiser, softer in spirit, but sharper in discernment. You are not the same, and that's exactly the point. You don't need applause. You don't need understanding. You don't even need closure. All you need is to remember who you are and whose you are. You were chosen, handpicked, set apart, not to impress the world, but to shift it. You are the seed, the soil, the bloom. You are the answered prayer someone else is still waiting for. Walk tall, knowing you were never delusional. You were simply tuned to a frequency they hadn't reached yet. And now that they're hearing the sound, let it be a melody of grace, a song of power, a testament to faith. Keep rising, keep glowing, keep becoming. And if this message confirmed something in your spirit, I invite you to share it, subscribe for more, and leave a word in the comments. You are seen, you are chosen, and you are walking proof. God bless you.